So welcome to another Hot Topic Tuesday. It is March 26, 2024. So guys, think about this. We're almost 1/4 of the way through the year. How are we doing for our production? We're setting ourselves up to be where we want to be before the end of the year. So just a thought, we're on the way. We've been doing all the right things all the way through, right? So let's get rolling, because what we want to hit, and guys, I'm going to ask you to participate. I'm going to do as well as I can with seeing the chat room, but at the same point, don't be afraid to bring yourself off of the mute, and let's have an actual open discussion today. So what we're really going to look at is not just the recent NAR settlement, but there's ties that come in with also what Anywhere, our franchisor, actually has done. Okay, so here we go. Everybody's been kind of seeing this, the headlines. And matter of fact, let me start with this one because one of our admins sent this to me this morning, and so I've got to get back to where is right here. So here was one, and it was coming from a supplier, a marketing company wanting to sell marketing materials. So what's one of the best ways to be able to sell anything? By the way, marketing materials, coaching, training, scare people. Right? Never let a good crisis go to waste. So that's really what's going on. So here's this one. What does a Sitzer-Burnett settlement mean your marketing strategy? Experts, this is on my phone, experts estimate that the total commission pool will shrink by up to 1/3, and as many as 80% of the agents will be forced out of the industry. Give me a break. Of course, let's take a look. Goodbye 6% commissions. When was it ever a fixed 6%? When was that ever out there? So again, this is the media that we're doing. Realtors agree to act 6% commissions in the NAR lawsuit settlement. As NAR settles, real estate braces for a seismic shift. That was in the Inman News, by the way, which is all about real estate. So again, create it. Everything you need to know about commissions is poised to change as NAR reaches a massive $418 million. Everything is going to change. And brokers and agents will probably quit. These were all headlines that I've seen. And then, of course, the real estate business is changing forever. Now, if that's all we see, that does get a little bit scary, doesn't it? So I'm going, really? I mean, really? What we need to do is to really fully understand that. And that's what today is about. Okay. So again, if you watch my previous video that came out quite quickly after the NAR settlement, this was on Friday, March 15th. Everybody got the notice around 10:15 a.m. Guys, what happened between that time and now? What has changed? And the answer is nothing. At this point, nothing has changed from what we have already made adjustments to do. Okay? From there, we know sellers are still going to sell. Buyers are still going to buy. And as a company, we're still going to charge 3% to a seller. We're still going to charge 3% to the buyer. The last I know, you add those two together, that was 6%. That's what our company policy was. Did we change anything? And are we going to change anything? And the answer is no. So if you're asking, what's the company position on this? Nothing's changed. You have to understand, nothing has changed. Well, yeah, but what about come mid-July? Well, then let's cover what the key points to the settlement is between really adding together Anywhere and NAR is what we want to take a look. So guys, I've got a list of things. We've numbered them. Here's the first part, and it really is good news. There's the release of liability. Almost all of us are off the hook. Within NAR, MAR, NACBOR, GMAR, whatever part of an association you're with, we're off the hook. Anywhere, Century 21, Coldwell Banker, Century 21 Professional or Century 21 Town and Country, SAGMAR, Row, AAA North, Coldwell Banker Professionals, we're all off the hook. Probably most important to you is that you are off the hook. So it was a good settlement in a positive way for us, okay? Number two change, and this is the real biggie. It's the compensation to a buyer's broker may not be posted on the MLS. That's it. It doesn't say that you can't charge it. Let me rephrase it. It doesn't say that you can't offer it. It does not say you cannot offer it. It just says you cannot advertise it in the MLS. I got a question here. Well, the release of liability is a question here, and the release of liability, remember, what they were going after was price fixing. So there were all of these copycat lawsuits that were beginning to pop up. This settlement releases us from any further action that anybody could take against us for this price fixing. And that's in short what the whole thing was about. And again, was it ever a 6%? It's always been a negotiable amount. We know as a company, HRC family of companies, that we have set a minimum. And even then, have we made adjustments? Yes. Circumstances would allow us to be able to make adjustments to what the commission with approval from our broker manager. Okay. So number three, to know that the compensation being offered can be promoted everywhere else. So it's not just the aspect that it's off everywhere that we can't offer compensation. I go back, the only thing that has changed is that we can't advertise it, cannot advertise it on the MLS, but we can advertise it and promote it anywhere else. So guys, in the end, who knows? I'm guessing it will be able to be promoted out on all of the websites. So Coldwell Banker, Century 21. What's that one company that everybody always goes, oh, yeah, those guys too. So it could be promoted out there. And I would think as a buyer, when buyers get educated, that buyers would want to know about how much is the seller or the listing broker offering its compensation. Number four.
I have a question about the compensation, Darren. Yes. So I read in a subsequent filing or print somewhere from NAR that they are going to allow buyers or sellers in the MLS to make an offer of a 3% seller concession towards buyer's costs, which is actually going to be a commission. Did you read that also?
Michelle.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is actually number 4 here.
Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to get ahead of you. Never mind.
Well, if only you knew what I had set up. No, it's great. It leads right into it. So yes, and this is kind of the silliness of what they're doing. They're saying you cannot advertise it directly out there, but you can offer a concession toward closing costs, which, as we know, we've always done. Well, what is now the cost of us as a buyer's broker? What does that cost to a buyer? It's a closing cost. So I think it's at least a portion of where they were using some common sense. As you can tell, I don't like everything about what the bureaucrats or the lawyers have created for us. But it was one of the things that I think they were thinking about in advance. Because in the end, we're just another expense directly to the buyer, which is what they're really trying to drive home on all of this. We are an expense to the buyer. And a key word that really Paul Wolfert, and many, by the way, you might have saw Paul Wolfert on the Fox 2 yesterday in the 5 o'clock hour. Paul did a great job and by the way, Fox 2 also in clarifying and getting rid of all of the negative press to begin educating people on really what the change has been. And transparency is a word. So the transparency that they were shooting for is for buyers to know what the buyer's broker was being compensated. So that transparency is now in there, and that will come up as we talk further. However, the transparency for us as brokers is a little bit moneyed, because now we got to go find what a broker, a listing broker, is offering as compensation, or what a seller is offering as compensation. So with what Michelle just brought up to us, number 4, yes, you can offer seller concessions. The only thing you cannot do is to earmark it as to be applied toward a buyer broker's fee. So it will be a concession that can be promoted on the MLS, but you cannot earmark it as a fee or an amount to be applied toward a buyer broker's fee. All right. And of course, what is the mortgage market going to do? They're figuring that out. But frankly, it's just one of the other things that I believe the bureaucrats didn't think about with all of this. They had to create programs to get first-time home buyers into homes because they didn't have enough money. And now they want to go, oh, but let's throw 3% more on the buyer and figure out how they can pay it. So again, yep, it's what's occurred, and we're going to keep it really simple, guys. It really is going to be simple. I'm going to keep thinking that way. Compensation. Although I think in our area, and let me add this, by the way, I believe the state of Michigan and Southeast Michigan, and absolutely our company, we're poised in a very good position because we've already had most of these things in place. So there's no real change coming up for us other than one thing. So as an example, compensation cannot be required in the MLS any longer. How many of us ever knew that there was even the potential that it was a requirement? But I just want to make sure you all know, because here's one of the biggest things that we have to do: educate the public, because the media, being self-serving, are driving a very negative message, and they're confusing people, even to the point to where, how many have already heard, and I know Danny heard this, she brought it to me this morning, people are coming to her and going, how are you going to make any money if they're taking away your commissions? So I know she's not the only one that has heard that. Okay. And I'm going to hold off on answering. I'll probably just go back and review some of these questions because they're popping up pretty quick and I can't catch them all. Here's a big change, guys. Now, the aspect of us getting written agreements when we represent a buyer is not new. If we represented a buyer, what we would say is we must disclose our agency relationship in writing prior to the exchange of any confidential information. Now, that's what we should have been doing. What probably happen at times, something in my eye, was we'd get the agency agreement signed once we made an offer. And that's why there's a bit of an issue. Because the buyer didn't even know what they were responsible for paying, because we were doing it at that time. This settlement now says, and I'm just going to read what I put in here. Before you even show a home, it requires that MLS participants working with buyers enter into written agreements with the buyers. So just like, if you will, if we really break down agency disclosure, when it came out and the world as we knew it, real estate as we knew it, was changed forever. It said that prior to the exchange of any confidential information, we must disclose in writing. Now, that's the law, and yet, when do we normally disclose in writing? You see, there's the law, and then there's dealing with the real world. So we're going to look at this the same way. But here's what we know. The change being driven not necessarily by the market, but by attorneys and bureaucrats, is that you've got to now begin sitting down with a buyer and interviewing for the job of helping to buy a home, disclosing your agency, and having them sign a contract. Now, the additional part to this is it has to outline specifically how much your compensation is, how it's going to be earned, and how it's going to be received. And guys, it's already covered in our buyer broker agreement. So again, we've already been making the adjustments to meet this. So again, what's the real change here? We've got to educate the community. We have to educate ourselves, and we have to meet with these buyers and get them to understand that this is how it works. So you want to work with a real estate broker, have an agent finding you homes, you're going to have to sign an agreement. You see, it's the same as what sellers know you have to do. If you want to work with a real estate broker in listing a home, you have to sit down, interview, sign an agency disclosure, and then sign an agency contract. We call it a listing agreement. But the community, the public, needs to be educated. Who's going to educate them? That's up to us, folks. So all of the stuff that the negative press has done, we've got to correct and help them understand. Number 7, realtors are prohibited from leaving compensation open-ended in the buyer broker agreement. So, as I put here, you must state specifically and may not be vague. And here's the change. You cannot collect more than the contract specifies. What does that mean? See, before we'd have them sign a contract for, say, 3%. But a listing broker said, hey, seller, to offer an additional incentive, let's offer 4% to the buyer's broker. Guess what? Not anymore. Because, and this is the key, until the clarification comes out, you can only take what you have an agreement with on that buyer representation agreement. If it says 3, that's what you get. Make sense? Well, change it in writing. So a question came up is, can we change that? Like, so, and I mean, think about this. because this is what we'd have to do. I'd have to go to the buyer and say, hey, buyer, this selling broker, let me rephrase that, the listing broker or the seller is offering to give me 4%. So I need you to change your agreement so that I can keep that. Now, I don't know about you, but I'd ask a few more questions and I probably wouldn't be too excited about it. And this is something that I had always said, I don't know how that we could do it, but it was legal. How can you think about the contract as it has been written for the most part? It said that we'd get 3% and anything that we got from the listing broker, the seller would be credited toward that amount. Well, if it said that you got 3, but you got 4, what happened to that extra? Credit, that seemed like to me it should have went back to the buyer. Well, now it's very specific. It's very clear. By this settlement, can't do it. So negotiate from that aspect. All right. Everybody good with that one? Let's see. We're on to the next one. Oh, Paula, great question. In the agreement, 3% means that the buyer will pay for it. Nope. It's, again, guys, this is the part that everybody is kind of confused about. It didn't say that the buyer has to pay it. The transparency that all of this is really after is for the buyer to know that they're paying 3%. But the contract isn't changing. Contract is still going to address that we can get paid in various ways. Hold on to that thought, but it's not that the buyer must pay it. It just said this: the offer of compensation cannot be advertised on the MLS, but it can be advertised everywhere else. So a seller or a listing broker could still offer compensation to pay the buyer broker's fee. And you'll see we're actually going to put that on there. All right. Number 9 in this settlement, or these settlements, cooperative compensation must be conspicuously disclosed to the sellers in writing, and the seller has to approve before making any offer of cooperative compensation. So guys, take a look at our current listing agreement. Is it not very conspicuous as to, 1, the amount that we're charging, 2, the amount that we are going to offer, and by them initialing, approving that we offer it? Nothing's changed. Do I have number 10? Oh, I do have a number 10. Realtors must conspicuously disclose to prospective sellers and buyers that broker commissions are not set by law and are fully negotiable. Now, apparently the general public didn't know that, and that's why we had so many 5s, 4s, brokers that were often out there doing 1s and 3s, and Help You Sell's doing 500 for a flat fee. That's the world that we live in with our bureaucrats. And by the way, I'll tell you, what do I believe? This was all about trying to break up the benefit of the multiple listing service. I wouldn't doubt if there were some large corporations involved in it. Okay? Which is, by the way, the reason I put that little bit out there, that these are the opinions of the participants and don't necessarily go along with the views of HRC. But for the most part, guys, what we're putting out here, it's the facts. So let me just real quick take a look at this and go, what's changed? You can't put the offer of compensation on the MLS. That's one. And you're going, well, how do we find out? Because it's going to be in a lot of other places. It may mean that I have to put a call in and go, hey, Danny, Darwin over at Coldwell Banker, you guys offer any compensation on this? Yeah, we sure are. Great. And we have an agreement. Okay? They go, no, seller wasn't willing to do it. Hey, buyer, you're going to have to build the 3% into the offer unless you want to pull it out of your pocket. See, we've just got to keep everything simple. And we're going to get them all in writing, because what's missing is what's in writing. Yeah, and somebody just actually put it here, no verbal agreements. So make sure that you get everything taken care of. So literally then, how are we going to collect our compensation? We're on that discussion. You've got to become good negotiators. But for the most part, it should already be out there. If it's out there, you're going to find it. I don't think we're going to have to do that much more work, because there's only one place that it cannot be, and that's in the MLS. But look for the aspect of, did the seller offer concessions? So, gang, nothing's changed from how we can collect our compensation. It hasn't changed. There's no part of this that changed where a buyer broker can get the compensation. In the past, it could come from the listing broker. It still can. In the past, it could come from the seller. It still can. In the past, it could come from the buyer, and it still can. And the only question is what is the mortgage market going to allow in regards to a seller paying any additional concessions over and above what we've already been used to? My bet, it's going to change. So if a seller wants to offer it and make sure it's in the MLS, where it used to be they might say the seller's willing to pay 3% concessions, maybe they didn't say it at all. Well, now they could put it in there, the seller's willing to compensate or actually offer 3% in concessions towards purchase or closing costs. Now, how the buyer uses that is up to them. It could be that where if they would have offered 3, now they might offer 6. Is the mortgage market going to allow that to happen? I don't know, but if I were a betting man, yes, it's going to happen. And oh, by the way, if we have to go to the seller, there's already, for those that are in Remind Docs Plus, already in your packages, a seller concession addendum. It's already in there. If you're in Transaction Desk or others, it's either going to be in there shortly, or however long it takes Transaction Desk to get it loaded. As soon as it is, we'll get it into the templates for you so that you have that. And again, really simple, it's closing costs. And it's in writing, in agreement with the seller, what the seller will actually compensate. If a seller refuses to offer compensation for a buyer agent, then what do I do? Let me ask you this. Let's take us into the past. Many of us have worked with a for sale by owner. And a for sale by owner is not offering any compensation, but what will we do? Hi, Ms. Fisbo? Darwin, I'm a local real estate agent over at Century 21 Sackmar. Just calling to see whether or not if I were able to bring you a ready, willing, and able buyer, if you would offer compensation. You would? Great. And we handle it. Matter of fact, there was a commission agreement. Still is. The commission agreement said, as a for sale by owner, I understand I'm not being represented. The buyer's, this agent is representing the buyer, but I am willing to compensate. Nobody went up in arms about that, yet that's what we've done historically. You may not have, but it's been out there and it could be done. How about this one? Yeah, hi, it's Darwin over at Century 21 Town and Country. The reason I'm calling is to see whether or not if I brought you a ready, willing, and able buyer, if you would be willing to compensate. We don't even want to compensate in any way whatsoever. Well, no problem. In the end, my buyer is responsible for seeing that I get paid. But if they wanted to buy it, would you mind if I sold it to them? I want to hear one of them say no. So what do? The buyer makes it part of their offer. And they put it on a seller concession addendum. Well, what if the seller doesn't agree? Well, then you didn't offer enough money. Guys, keep it simple. We're trying to overcomplicate the simplification to all of this. Oh, so what if it's listed, but the listing agent or the seller is not offering compensation? No problem. The buyer is responsible for seeing that we get paid. So if the It's not being advertised that they won't offer compensation. How often were your concessions where you asked for 3% towards closing costs, taxes, prepaids, and any other allowable expense? What did you do? It wasn't being promoted, but what did you do? You offered. You made an offer. What's the worst thing that happened? You couldn't put together a deal. And you went out and you found them another home. Don't overcomplicate the simplify. Just don't overcomplicate. Just simplify it. We're trying to create things that do not exist. And that's why what you're constantly hearing me saying, what's changed or what will change come mid-July? Guys, we got to keep it simple. When it comes to collecting our compensation, zero has changed. Wow, this has taken longer than I thought. Here we go. Here's some points to ponder. I heard this in an interview, similar to what Paul did with Fox 2, only it was from a different perspective because the interviewer asked the agent, how did we ever get to a point of a seller paying the buyer broker compensation? We got to understand history. So guys, educate the public, and I hope you can stay with me. Obviously, this is being recorded. It will be on the HRC Agent Development channel. Typically, Sherry is able to get this up for us before the end of the day, as long as technology cooperates. Historically, previous to 1995, there's only a couple of us on here that have been around that long. I ask you, who did agents represent? The answer? Sellers. Automatically. Real estate agents represented the sellers, not the buyers. So logically, the sellers paid the commission because the brokers were representing the seller, right? But the market started getting wise and said, well, wait a minute. I'm a buyer. Why can't I be represented? As a matter of fact, when you really went to it, back then, if you asked the buyer if the person they worked with represented them, they said, yep. Many of the agents thought they represented the buyer. As a matter of fact, the seller thought that the agent working with the buyer represented the buyer. That's not good. So we just simply brought transparency and we allowed both parties. And of course, everybody was up in arms and how is this all going to work? And oh my God, the world of real estate as we know it is going to change forever. And and here we are still. We can't think of it anything different than what we did back then. All right. Sharing of compensation didn't change. And I'll cover why. I want you to think about this. Matter of fact, let's type this into the chat. Who has always paid the commission? Go ahead, let's type it in so everybody can see it. I'm waiting for it to start popping up. Who has always paid? Keep going, you guys. Everybody participate. You guys are really well educated. Interesting. So, who's always paid the commission? Well, seller has. As you can see by the chat, you could argue that the buyer has. As you could see from the chat, there's the listing broker paid it. And nobody said this. Well, I think there was one just right there. Transaction. Transaction paid it. And the basic thought behind that, by the way, seller wants to sell and a buyer wants to buy. The two of them came together. What did that create? a transaction. And what's part of any transaction? A commission. How's it get split? Good question. So let me ask you this. In the public's opinion, who paid the commission? I think we'd all agree that for the most part, I would bet it's close to 90%. Yes, Jack, thank you. Seller. By the closing statements, who paid the commission? This is the clearest one, because if you've ever looked at it, and you all better be, because let's make sure that the transaction is closing in accordance to the purchase agreement. The seller, as a matter of fact, I believe as an industry, this was part of what created what we have, because on there, it shows that the seller paid the listing broker, we'll use our numbers, 3%, and it showed that the seller paid the buyer's broker 3%. But what's the contracts say? By contract, here's what we need to do. And it's a change in our personal mindset. And if we can change our mindset, we can change the way that other people think about it, because here's the reality. This is proven in writing. Matter of fact, this contract was signed before we even put the home on the market. And here's what the contract said. The seller is going to pay you 6% of the purchase price. And call it what you want. I always referred to it as a marketing fee. It was not a commission. Why did I call it a marketing fee? It's because that's what we did. So if the seller agreed to pay us 6%, there was no place, if you will, in writing other than what we posted in the MLS, but here's what we were doing. Seller of that 6%, I'm going to invest 50% of it into marketing and offering it as an incentive to all other real estate agents, realtors, who will bring us a ready, willing, and able buyer who's willing to pay you an amount under the terms of which you'll accept. Who really paid that fee to the buyer's broker? Y'all better be 100% on this, because it was the listing broker. That's, yeah, I get a little passionate about this, because I've always said, this is the way that we need to see it. If we always saw it this way, then we wouldn't ever had this NAR lawsuit. Well, I don't know, the bureaucrats are out there and attorneys that are hungry. We've got to educate people. This is the way that it worked. In reality, it was a listing broker who was getting paid a quote unquote full commission to then offer compensation to a buyer's broker. That doesn't need to change. There was nothing forcing us to change that. The only thing is we cannot promote that on the MLS. We're prohibited from marketing, advertising, compensation to the buyer's broker on the MLS. And you're going, wow, well, should a seller still allow or pay compensation to a seller's broker? Let me go back to something that prior to buyer agency we were able to do. It was a technique, and we go, well, seller, if you were a buyer's agent and you had an opportunity to sell one of these homes, which one would you sell? You had one. Yep, go ahead, Sherry.
I just need to state this, I guess. When you say that the compensation for, or your fee as a listing broker is by the broker's incentive.
Well, let me repeat.
To bring sellers in.
So the seller paid the listing broker 6%, of which the listing broker would then pay the buyer broker's fee.
Correct. So the lawsuit states that, we have to be transparent, right? So then
Correct.
why can't we state that the listing broker would compensate a seller or a buyer's broker? So I'm confused but we can't show that on the MLS. So to me, that's not transparent.
Well, there's the attorneys and the bureaucrats. So yes, we can still do exactly what we were doing. Matter of fact, at this point, if there's any change to our listing agreement, it's minor because we're already specifying it's a full commission, that here's how much of what you're giving us we will offer, and you're approving us offering that. But we can't offer it on the MLS. And you're absolutely seeing it, Sherry, why it's silly. I don't have anything else that I can add to that. So what you said, you're absolutely right. What was the logic? I don't know. You're dealing with attorneys and bureaucrats. Great question. And especially that you can call it a concession, as long as you don't call it buyer broker's compensation.
It just seems so
Weird.
But you can still
irrelevant.
pay a buyer broker commission as long as the sellers are agreeing that they're going to pay a buyer broker commission.
Yeah, so you can still do it.
Yeah.
You just
I mean,
can't call it that on the MLS.
I've explained to my sellers that it's going to, instead of it coming on the listing agreement, it's just going to come on the PA when you're entertaining offers. And it's just going to be another negotiating thing. What offer nets you the most? Is this?
Yeah, I
don't know.
think, well,
I
matter of
kind of
fact,
feel
let me go through this scenario here. And some of you, if you've been around for a while, you'll remember we used to go through and we'd say, seller would want to say, well, would you do less? And I would discourage a seller from being able to do that. And I'd create this scenario, because if you were an agent out there working with a buyer, and the only way that you get paid is by selling this buyer a home, and the more that a seller is willing to pay, the more that you would be paid. And you had these houses out here. Out of these houses, which ones would you try not to sell? Okay. And that became obvious. But then we started representing buyers. We couldn't do that. Right? Now, if you ever did, shame on you, but we shouldn't have been doing that, because our job was to represent the buyer and show them any home, because the buyer was responsible for seeing that we get paid. And by the way, I don't think anything's different. The buyer is still responsible for seeing that we get paid, and how we get paid is still exactly the same. And that's why if we just keep everything normal, other than two things, don't promote it on the MLS as a buyer broker fee, and get buyers to sign a contract up front before you show them houses. Two things that have changed. Don't overcomplicate it, guys, because literally, if you went through the 10 things I did, that's the changes. So now here's the thing. Seller says, well, I don't want to offer compensation. That's that dog right here. So seller, let me throw it out here. A buyer, knowing that they're going to be responsible for seeing that their broker gets paid, knows that if there's a seller or a listing broker that's offering compensation to their broker, do you think they might be a little bit incentivized to make sure they look at particular homes or stay away from others? So as a matter of fact, if you were a buyer and you had 4 homes, all of them were the same, what home would you definitely not want to take a look at, knowing that it's going to cost you 3% more? What one would you want to see least after that? And what about after that? What would you avoid? And it's because there's a seller out there who's willing to offer the compensation, either directly or through their listing broker. And what's the shift on this? I simply said, if you were a buyer, which one of these homes might you not look at? And if we educate the buyer as to how we get compensated, because this goes along with get the agency contract signed before you ever show a home, there's your change. And they understand how they can compensate us, either from the listing broker, the seller, or themselves out of their own pocket. Obviously, they can build it into their purchase agreement. Wouldn't the home be more marketable if a seller was offering compensation, either as a compensation through the listing broker or as a concession for closing costs directly to the buyer? I got a question here.
Considering today's market, when you're talking about certain homes in certain neighborhoods, where it may be the only home that is listed in a neighborhood, and people want to move into it because it's very desirable, what's the incentive for them to have a buyer's compensation?
So the question I'll try to, let's say there's only one home on the market in a very desirable neighborhood. Why would a seller offer compensation or a concession directly to the buyer when they're the only home on the market in this highly demand area? Exposure. Why should a FSBO in that same exact situation even list their home? Sure. But now, what about, so she said, but you are exposed because they've listed it on the MLS. Great. And from a point of marketability, what will get you more buyers into the door? One where you're offering 3% or one where you're offering 0? Offering the 3%. It's more marketable. And that's the key. You're going to get greater exposure. More people will come in because they know. Now, are we ever going to be able to prove that? But what we know is that's the way it works. That's called supply and demand, right? So as a listing agent in open house, now capturing buyers, but I don't have a buyer agency with them to put in an offer. I really don't have a dual agency. So I have to explain to the seller, pay, wow. So here's one, and this actually came up. Could a seller not offer compensation to buyer broker or allow the agent or the broker? The answer is yes. So what would happen is, or what would happen if you, the listing agent, procured the buyer? Ruh-roh. Well, I'll tell you one of the things that I believe that we could do is, in the event that listing broker or listing agent, maybe if it's listing broker, I haven't even thought about it from that. This is the type of stuff that we've got to think about, but I think there's always an answer for it. But think of it this way. In the event that the listing agent, we'll keep it simple, is to procure the purchaser, commission will be, maybe it's 6%, maybe it's 5%, because see, somehow I get to be compensated for working with that buyer, not for. So maybe it has to become part of a purchase agreement that we stipulate. What if? So yeah, I don't have any problem with that. Matter of fact, previously, I used to teach you guys, when you were ready for it, I'll throw it out. I get 3% if I find you a home through the MLS. I get you 4% if I sell it for sale by owner. I get 5% if I find you a home that's not even on the market. But I get to represent only you, buyer, not the seller. And therefore, even though I charge more when I have that, how much money are you saving? Because there's no other party involved in the transaction. There's nobody to negotiate against. How much do I save you? So I'm well worth it in that situation. Could a buyer go directly to a listing agent? Sure. So the buyer wants to go directly to a listing agent whose sole responsibility is to represent the seller. Are you sure you want to do that? Guys, we've got to educate the public. We've got to educate the consumer. So we're thinking of the worst. What's the answer to whatever we come up with? So highest and best will now need to ask for less compensation, so our offer is accepted in hopes. Why? Why do you have to take less because they found a host that is in a highest and best situation? Why do you have to take less? Why shouldn't they pay more? Did you do something you're not earning the same amount? Change our mindset. Change our mindset. Guys, I love you all. So when I give you some of this, that's coming from the heart. Can a listing agent negotiate with the seller up front that they will charge them blank percent on listing, will credit them blank dollars for the buyer's side commission owed? I'm not sure I understand that, John.
So what I'm saying is, instead of charging them the usual, well, let's say negotiated rate commission on the seller side, let's say I double that. So maybe I'm going to charge them 3 and I double that and I'm going to charge them 6. Or if I charge them 6, I'm going to charge them 9 on the sell side. And then what I'll do is I'll credit them 3% towards their closing costs on the buy side. So maybe it is not a big a hit for them on the buy side, just as a sort of an offset.
Yeah. I think at that point, the reason I always put it in, you've seen the clause, seller pay 3% of the purchase price to be applied toward purchaser's closing cost taxes, prepaids, any other allowable expense. That's where it's going to be. What will the mortgage market allow, if I'm understanding your question correctly? So if they would allow it, I would say, yeah, let's do that. Let's see, I got a couple more points that I think we can land. Oh, I missed one. I think I missed one. Nope, that was it. So guys, what else do you have that we can wrap up with and enjoy what this new look is going to be for us? It really, instead of me strolling all the way through all of these comments in here, what else might you have a question of?
Darwin,
Yes.
I think
Yes.
they should change their name to Gnarly. Just making fun.
Hey, with what they've done sometimes, and it brings up a great point, and it's always nice to poke a little bit fun, but let's not make a mistake. We need NAR. We do need that, because Lord knows where our profession would be if we did not have NAR out there working with us, representing us, and fighting for home ownership. The world could be a lot different place if we didn't have that. So I think that's a very good thing that we do have, but yeah, we can always poke some fun at it for sure. What else you got out there, guys?
Hey, Darwin, it's Bob.
Yes.
If anybody hasn't seen it yet, Jared James did a interview with both Nick Bailey, which was a former CEO of Century 21, and he also did another interview with Kevin Sears, president of NAR. And everybody hates NAR, but you can understand why they did what they did. If you hear that,
Absolutely.
that you really understand the reasoning for that. So just wanted to
Yeah.
point that out. You can see that.
Absolutely. There was
Yeah.
no way around us doing what ended up happening, became the bottom line. Because the worst of it would have been bankruptcy and everything dissolved as far as NAR.
Right.
Therefore, basically no more MAR, no anything. So it was there was just no way around it for us to be able to take care of it any other way. So settlement worked out, and in the end, we're all good. Yes,
Darwin,
ma'am.
someone else mentioned this in the chat, but is there any way we can get on the local news and get this out correctly, as opposed to, I mean, there was just another agent on this morning, and it's
Yeah,
just,
as a matter of fact, I was saying that everybody who was on last week, you met Paul Wolfert, and Roop from Fox
Right.
2 actually had Paul on there yesterday at 5 o'clock.
okay.
So I will, I'm sure I'm going to get that probably onto the Facebook channel so that we have it there as a minimum. But Paul did a great job, and it was great for Roop reaching out because he got a hold of Paul and said, Paul, what's the scoop with this? I've spent a few hours and it sounds like you guys aren't going to make any money anymore. So that was a reporter for Fox 2 who got a hold and said, hey, let's set the record straight and start educating the public on what's really going on.
Right, it was
And
on 9 this morning again, and it was not real clear. And I was just thinking, if one
Yeah.
of you guys from our brokerage get on there, I mean, Phil knows a bunch of those guys. He should be able to get you a spot.
Yeah, I think that is something for us to be able to look at. And what I would tell you guys, there's 65 of us logged in right now, plus all of you sitting around TV screens, because we got 4 or 5 people here in Rochester today. Actually, it was 6 or 7. What if every one of us went out there and said, hey, in simplest terms, public, here's what's happened. That would have a great impact. So I really think that that's what we all need to do. And I'm glad that everybody showed up here today, because I really believe that the most important thing for us is to educate the public after we educate ourselves.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Barbara.
Maybe I missed something here, but wouldn't I have to know what they were selling for the fee before I put in my offer? If
I'm
I'm
not
rep-
sure what you mean.
well, if I'm representing the buyer and he's got to pay the fee if they're not offering one,
Yep,
I need to know all that before I put in my offer.
correct. So
So
remember,
meanwhile-
that's where it's not going to be posted on the MLS. So their part of transparency created transparency for the buyer, created a lack of transparency to realtors.
Yeah,
So
so
it may be as simple as I have to call and say, hey, Barbara Darwin, you got compensation offered on that?
Yeah, but what happens if, not all agents tell the truth? Sorry.
Well, remember what we'll do. If you make that offer, I'm going to get a signed agreement with the broker. So guys, as we move forward, if it's the broker offering the compensation, I don't want an agent signature. I want a signature on there by the broker or someone who can sign on behalf of the broker.
Thank
So
you.
that will be, get that in writing. Absolutely. Otherwise, it can be made part of the purchase agreement and using a seller concession addendum.
So what about a buyer agents, the one we do the notification that they'll pay the commission?
Yeah, the what is it? Notice of buyer agency?
Notice of buyer agency.
Yeah.
Signed by the broker? Or could the
think that
agent
will
sign
work
it?
right
Or the
now, and
seller
we
could
could-
sign it?
Yeah, I think we could send it over, but the only thing is that I foresee that changing, because right now it says seller signature or
Right, yeah,
I
you'd
think
have
it
to-
says agent signature.
Yeah,
Uh,
you'd have to.
We're going to
broker,
want the broker signature to cover ourselves.
Right.
I have a
So I
question.
think that one will change, but there will be something very, very similar to that.
Hey, Darwin,
Yes.
I saw Sally made a comment regarding what if we had a form that we put on our disclosures to upload it to say what the seller's willing to offer on the disclosure? Just like a reverse of a buyer
My-
agency
Boo.
form.
So I'm thinking about what it says. And if we earmarked it as compensation for buyer broker,
Yeah,
even though it's not quote unquote published, if it's part of the listing and part of the documents, because that's, I believe, the way it's labeled, it probably would not fly.
Someone put in the chat, which was something that I had thought about too. Could it be in showing time under the showing instructions?
Or next to the lockbox code.
Say that again, Bill?
3% is a lockbox code. But I mean, could it be part of the showing instructions? Or is that still considered part of the MLS?
I just knowing how the bureaucrats and the attorneys are, because showing time is part of the MLS, my guess would be no. But who knows? Until we try it, anything's possible. And what's the worst that we should have up front? A slap in the hand because no, that's still part of. maybe we'll try that. Well, we're gonna get more and more clarification as we move toward mid-July. And again, all of us are assuming that this agreement will be accepted.
But I don't think
So
that
that is a key
showing
part for
time
us too.
is a MLS thing. Doesn't Zillow own that showing time
I think you're right.
program? So
They bought it.
Um,
You're right, they bought it, Karen.
exactly.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah, Zillow owns
So-
that program, not the
Yeah.
MLS.
Hey, Zillow may not like it because they were part of this lawsuit for all I know.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. Again, my guess would be it's tied to the MLS. The bureaucrats would say, no, I don't like that. So no, you can't do it there.
And excuse me, Darren, I have a question. This is Bruce.
Yeah.
I see agents that are posting right now, compensation is 0, but in public remarks, they will put, agent remarks, it states that the seller will give a 3% to a buyer's agent. Is that allowable?
Well, it's allowable currently. But should this, as all of us are anticipating, be accepted, mid-July, that would no longer be acceptable. So they could offer 0 and they could say seller will pay a 3% concession toward buyer's closing costs. But again, the key on it, Bruce, is they cannot specify that it be for a buyer, broker, commission, or compensation.
All right, thank you.
You don't have to
You
do
bet.
that till July, though. You don't have to do that now.
Right, it's not
Right.
necessary now. So again, the key, nothing's changed for us right now. We always have been, I think we've got that.
Are
Could you
our
put a
fees
quote?
gonna go up now with dishing out $418 million out to?
Well,
They still
Karen,
have-
that's a great question. And I don't have an answer for it. And I've
They
been
released a
looking
statement
for
that said
that.
no. They
What's
released a
that?
statement that said no.
Oh,
I
okay.
saw a statement released from NAR that said no.
Okay.
Okay, cool.
Kevin,
Because everything that they've been saying is that they have the money to pay it. And they've set it up so they can pay it over 4 years.
Yeah.
So that's great to hear. I
They
haven't
said
seen
they
it yet,
wouldn't do
but
it for
you
2
have,
years.
that's a
They
good
wouldn't
thing.
raise our dues. For 2 years, they wouldn't raise our dues.
They'll try to kick us in the pants afterward. Hopefully they are definitely that well set, is the way I'm hoping to see it. Still looking, just anything else that anybody's got? I'm just kind of scrolling through real quick, see if there's anything we might not have addressed.
Darwin, it's Bob.
Yep.
A thought. Years ago, well, before we all changed everything around with our company and HRC, our town and country listing agreement regarding commission had the selection of check off the box 6, 7, 8,
6, 7,
9.
8.
It went up to 10. And
Yep.
when I'm talking to, and this is in the past, when I was talking to sellers, well, you got 6. Why would I want to pay more than that? When you went into the explanation of the possibility of why it might benefit them as well, I've had some sellers go, okay, let's do 7. I had another one said, let's do 8. And it's kind of an eyeball roll, but they're willing to pay it when you talk to them the reasoning for that. So, but we don't have that.
One of the biggies for that was the additional compensation we could offer to a buyer's agent. And now that's not really going to make any sense. So that's kind of where we lose that. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't offer additional services. So one of the things that I and Alex have been promoting and teaching, coaching, is that what are the different levels of service that you could offer? So you could offer one marketing plan that would charge 6%, another would charge 7%, another would charge 8%. But it's what are you offering within that that would earn you that additional percentage? So something to kick around. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything else, guys?
Nope.
I'm thinking we're pretty much set, addressed. Don't be afraid to send me an email, give me a call. I am trying to watch everything that I can and what's coming out. But I think if you take what we've just covered today, again, this is going to be on the HRC Agent Development channel. Look for it there. Review what we've covered today. Be able to speak very clearly and simplified what's changed. And I just had this Sunday with a gentleman, and he said, oh, he said, I was wondering how you guys were getting paid, but nothing's changed. I said, not really, not as far as you guys will be concerned. He's like, good. I just want to make sure you guys get paid. So keep it simple. The only thing that's really changed, one, you can't promote it on the MLS. We can still offer it. We can still get it from any of those sources we've always been able to do. You just can't promote it on the MLS. Two, you got to get your agreements signed with buyers prior to showing homes. So when you get down to it, that's it. And it will become normal. And life is going to go on just like we've always known it, just a little bit more difficult for us to figure out how we're going to get compensation. So, by the way, I'll close with a couple of things. Excuse me. One, tomorrow in Livonia at our Century 21 Row location on 6 Mile, I'll be doing a back to the basics listing fundamental course. There's a couple of seats left over. You may come, that's 9 to 4, guys. It's a jam-packed, I'm taking 3 days worth of information, putting it into one day, 9 to 4. Call the Belleville office if you want to get on the list for that.
No Zoom?
No Zoom. You wouldn't sit there for a full day anyway. I know I wouldn't. I couldn't. So no, that one's live only. And we will be bringing other things out to you live, so it's close to you. But I want to let you know, next Tuesday, Chris Hendricks is going to be with us for Hot Topic Tuesday. And he's going to be looking at the state of the market as an address for us next Tuesday. Bring questions that you might have that you want to throw out to Chris, because we're hoping that we have plenty of time left over for a Q&A. So that's what's happening. Guys, I appreciate you. I hope that this answered many, many questions, brought some comfort to what you've got, and that you can take it out to the public, and we begin to correct what the wonderful media has really created a mess of. So there's the end of another Hot Topic Tuesday, guys. We'll see you next week. Bye now.
Great session, Darwin.
Thank you, Bob. I appreciate it, buddy.
Yes, thank you, Darwin.
Best thing we can do now is go out there and use this stuff. Take lots of listings, by the way. Then we don't even have to worry about the buyer part of it. Although get the buyers too. Collect them all. All right, guys. Have a great one. We'll see you. Bye-bye.